The Zenith Autocracy operated with a philosophy they called the efficiency of the void. Their dreadnoughts were massive, obsidian silhouettes of absolute power, designed to be the final sight for any species that dared to resist their expansion. When the fleet dropped out of hyperspace above the research station, Apex 7, there was no request for communication and no offer of parley. Overlord Vash-Korr watched from his command throne as the violet beams of his main batteries lanced through the station's paper-thin shields, turning a hub of science and civilian life into an expanding cloud of superheated debris. To Vash-Korr, the humans were nothing more than galactic janitors, a soft species that spent more on insurance and safety protocols than on actual planetary defense. He had heard the myths of their persistence, the tales of death-worlders who never stayed down. But looking at the wreckage of Apex 7, he saw only a convenient target and easy resources. "The strike is complete," the tactical officer reported, his mandibles clicking with a predatory rhythm. No survivors detected among the primary wreckage. Among the twisted metal and frozen atmosphere, however, several hundred small, triangular drones were ejected into the void. They did not flee and they did not fire back. Instead, they moved with a patient, calculating intelligence, latching onto the dreadnought's obsidian hull with magnetic grapples that vibrated at a dissonant, high-pitched frequency. Vash-Korr sneered at the tactical display, dismissing the drones as harmless sensors or desperate escape measures. He ordered the fleet to initiate the jump to the next sector, eager to continue his campaign of conquest. But as the warp drives began to hum, a sound like a physical weight resonated through the ship's entire frame. Every screen on the bridge flickered from combat data to a single static-filled message in Galactic Standard. The text was crisp, clinical, and utterly devoid of emotion. Unauthorized interference detected. Product integrity compromised. Liability claim filed. Do not attempt to move. Vash-Korr roared in fury, slamming his fist onto the console as his navigation grid froze completely. His combat computers, some of the most advanced in the sector, began to shut down in a submissive, automated lock. Outside the viewport, the sensors picked up a new contact. A single, unarmed human shuttle painted in neutral white and gray, emerging from the shadows of a nearby moon. It carried no weapons and no military escort, but as it approached the massive dreadnought, it broadcasted a signal that demanded total compliance. Vash-Korr realized with a sudden chill that the human wasn't bringing a fleet to avenge the dead. He was bringing the bill. Overlord Vash-Korr watched the viewport in disbelief. His fleet, 300 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy, sat dead in the void. The triangular drones hummed against the hull, their vibrations traveling through the deck plates and into the Overlord's very bones. He barked orders for the engineering teams to physically remove the drones, but the internal airlocks refused to cycle. "Sir, the main reactor is entering a safety sleep mode," the engineering officer cried, his voice trembling. "It's not a mechanical failure. The system is being told it is under a legal hold." Vash-Korr realized that every piece of high-end circuitry in his fleet had been manufactured using subcomponents licensed from Earth-based conglomerates. He had ignored the fine print for decades, assuming human licensing agreements were just empty bureaucratic formalities. Now, those formalities were turning his dreadnought into a high-tech prison. The human shuttle, designated the Auditor, glided toward the flagship's main docking bay. Usually, the Autocracy's automated turrets would have vaporized such a small vessel instantly. Instead, the turrets pivoted away, their targeting sensors disabled by a remote override. "Open the bay," Vash-Korr hissed, his hand gripping his ceremonial blade. "If this human wants to talk about bills, I will pay him in blood." The docking bay doors hissed open, and a single figure stepped out. He wasn't a soldier in power armor or a diplomat in a flowing robe. He was a man in a sharp gray charcoal suit, carrying a sleek black briefcase and a holographic scanner. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not at the center of a military crisis. The man, Kaelen Voss, adjusted his tie and looked up at the towering Zenith guards with their drawn plasma spears. He didn't flinch. He didn't even acknowledge the weapons. "Good afternoon," Kaelen said, his voice smooth and professional. "My name is Kaelen Voss, Senior Adjuster for Verity Systems. I'm here to process your claim regarding the accidental destruction of the Apex 7 station." "Accidental?" Vash-Korr laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the bay. "I destroyed that station by choice, human. I am Overlord Vash-Korr, and I do not recognize your claims or your authority." Kaelen Voss didn't stop smiling, but the expression became clinical. He opened his briefcase and a massive holographic document unrolled between them. Actually, Overlord, by firing on a human-insured asset, you have triggered a mandatory liability clause. Kaelen tapped his scanner, and the lights in the docking bay flickered to a cold, sterile white. According to our records, your entire fleet's power core warranty has just been voided. And since you've demonstrated a high-risk behavior profile, I'm authorized to perform an immediate on-site audit. Vash-Korr stepped forward, his blade humming. Audit? You are one man on a ship full of warriors. I will take your head and send it back to Earth. Kaelen Voss checked his watch and then looked Vash-Korr in the eye. I wouldn't do that, Overlord, because while I'm talking to you, my colleagues are currently repoing your homeworld's defense grid. Vash-Korr's communicator chirped frantically with a priority alpha alert from the Autocracy's capital. The Overlord's eyes widened as the transmission began to play, and for the first time in his life, he felt the cold breath of true terror. Overlord Vash-Korr did not become the leader of the Zenith Autocracy by listening to threats. He was a conqueror who had glassed worlds and broken civilizations beneath his boots. As the human, Kaelen Voss, stood calmly in the center of the docking bay, the Overlord felt a surge of pure, unfiltered rage. He lunged forward, his ceremonial plasma blade humming with enough energy to cleave a tank in two. I do not care about your warranties, human. Vash-Korr roared, the blade descending toward Kaelen's head. Kaelen Voss didn't move an inch. He didn't reach for a weapon, and he didn't call for help. He simply tapped a single icon on his holographic tablet. The result was instantaneous and terrifying. The glowing violet edge of Vash-Korr's blade didn't just stop. It vanished. The hum died into a pathetic whine, and the weapon became nothing more than a useless piece of cold metal. Vash-Korr stumbled, his momentum carrying him past the human, nearly falling onto the hard deck plates. What is this? Vash-Korr hissed, staring at his dead weapon. Sorcery? Mathematics, Kaelen replied, his voice as flat as a weather report. Specifically, the subatomic frequency stabilizers in your blade were manufactured by a human subsidiary. According to the terms of service you signed when you purchased those stabilizers from a third-party vendor, Verity Systems reserves the right to remotely disable any product involved in a verified safety violation. Vash-Korr straightened his heavy, armored shoulders, his three eyes narrowing. I signed nothing. My empire takes what it needs. True, Kaelen admitted, scrolling through a digital list. But the people you conquered, the ones you stole this technology from, they signed. And since you are now the successor in interest to their assets, you inherited their liabilities. By destroying Apex 7, you committed an act of gross negligence that voided the safety guarantee for every piece of human-derived tech in your possession. Kaelen stepped closer, his charcoal suit contrasting sharply with the jagged, obsidian architecture of the alien ship. Around them, the massive Zenith guards tried to raise their spears, only to find the weapons locking in place, their power cells drained by a remote command. You see, Overlord, Kaelen continued, humanity realized a long time ago that war is messy and expensive. It's much easier to just own the tools your enemies use to fight you. We didn't give you our best weapons. We gave you the parts you couldn't build yourselves. The sensors, the power relays, the stabilizers. Vash-Korr's communicator chirped again. This time, it wasn't an alert. It was a video feed from his capital planet. The Great Spire of the Autocracy, a monument to their power, was literally going dark. The lights were flickering out in a massive coordinated wave. We aren't just auditing your fleet, Vash-Korr, Kaelen said, his smile finally fading into something cold and professional. We are performing a total system reclamation. As of 3 minutes ago, the Zenith Autocracy has been declared technologically bankrupt. Your patents have been revoked. Your licenses are expired. And I am here to take back the collateral. Vash-Korr looked at his hands, realizing that even his life support armor was beginning to hiss, its oxygen scrubbers slowing down. He looked at the human, the bureaucrat he had mocked, and realized he wasn't looking at a diplomat. He was looking at a hunter who didn't even need a gun to win. What do you want? The Overlord whispered, his voice cracking. Kaelen Voss checked his tablet and adjusted his glasses. I want you to sit down and listen very carefully, because we're about to go over the repossession schedule. Overlord Vash-Korr stood paralyzed as the video feed from his capital world played out. It wasn't a scene of orbital bombardment or glorious fire. It was worse. The city's high-speed transit lines had simply glided to a halt. The massive atmospheric scrubbers that kept the air breathable for his species were slowing down, their humming rotors emitting a mournful, dying whine. "This is impossible," Vash-Korr whispered, his eyes fixed on the screen. "We built that city. We carved the stone. We forged the steel." "You did," Kaelen Voss replied, his voice echoing through the silent, dark docking bay. "But you used human-patented microfilters in the air systems. You used human-designed gravity stabilizers for the transit lines. And you used Verity Systems encryption for your central power grid. For 73 cycles, your people enjoyed the benefits of human innovation without ever paying the premium." Kaelen stepped forward, his shoes clicking sharply on the deck plates. "Humanity didn't just become part of the Galactic Council to trade spices or minerals. We became the safety net. We licensed our technology to everyone because we knew that if the galaxy relied on our parts, they would have to follow our rules. It's called interdependent stability. And you just shattered it." Vash-Korr turned, his face a mask of desperation. "I will pay. Name your price. I have vaults filled with Nex crystals. I have thousands of worker drones from a dozen conquered worlds." Kaelen Voss didn't even look up from his tablet. "This isn't a trade negotiation, Overlord. You are past the point of paying. By destroying a human-insured research station, you didn't just kill scientists. You triggered the Universal Liability Clause. The insurance companies that backed Apex 7 are currently liquidating your assets to cover the payout." Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the flagship. Vash-Korr lunged for a control panel, but the interface was dead. Outside the viewport, the triangular drones were no longer just latching onto the hull. Their edges began to glow with a searing white light. They were cutting. "They are taking the ship!" Vash-Korr roared. "My warriors will fight them in the corridors. We will repel your machines." "They aren't taking the ship, Vash-Korr," Kaelen corrected gently. "They are reclaiming the raw materials. Since you've voided the warranty and defaulted on the liability, the physical matter of this fleet is now legally considered scrap. And my salvage crews are very efficient." Vash-Korr watched in horror as a section of the flagship's outer hull was neatly sliced away by a drone, venting atmosphere into the void. His elite warriors, the pride of the Zenith Autocracy, were being sucked into space. Not by a weapon of war, but by a logistical protocol. The Overlord realized with a sickening jolt that he wasn't being conquered. He was being processed. Kaelen Voss looked at his tablet and sighed. "We're about to lose artificial gravity in this bay. I suggest you hold on to something. The reclamation of your homeworld's defense grid is scheduled to begin in 5 minutes. Would you like to watch, or should we skip to the part where you sign the dissolution papers?" The artificial gravity in the docking bay flickered once, groaned, and then died completely. Overlord Vash-Korr and his guards were left drifting in the weightless, freezing dark. The only light came from the cold blue glow of Kaelen Voss's tablet and the white-hot arcs of the salvage drones as they began systematically cutting through the flagship's thick hull. Vash-Korr kicked off a bulkhead, his massive frame propelling him toward the human with a roar of primal defiance. He didn't need a plasma blade. His natural claws were sharp enough to tear through reinforced steel. Kaelen Voss didn't flinch. He didn't even look up from his screen as the 4-meter-tall warlord hurtled toward him. Just as Vash-Korr's talons reached for the human's throat, a sharp electronic chirp echoed through the bay. Suddenly, Vash-Korr's own combat armor, the unyielding shell of the Zenith Autocracy, locked its joints. The motorized servos groaned, then seized, freezing the Overlord in mid-air like a statue. His momentum stopped instantly, leaving him suspended by the very technology that was supposed to protect him. "You foul creature!" Vash-Korr hissed, his voice muffled by the failing helmet seal. "Release me." "I'm afraid I can't do that, Overlord," Kaelen said, finally looking up. "You see, this is what we call a safety interlock. Your armor is equipped with human-patented neural link stabilizers. When the patent for those stabilizers was revoked 60 seconds ago due to your breach of the liability clause, the software defaulted to secure and contain mode." Kaelen drifted closer, his feet anchored to the deck by magnetic soles. "It's not just your armor. It's your shield generators, your long-range scanners, and even the life support systems in your medical bays. The Zenith Autocracy has spent the last century building its empire on open-source human tech that we released for peaceful development. You thought it was a gift. We saw it as a contract. We modified it," Vash-Korr growled, struggling against the unmoving metal of his suit. "It is Zenith craft now. Modification doesn't erase the origin, Overlord. Kaelen corrected, his voice echoing in the thin air. Every line of code you added is still sitting on a human-built foundation. And that foundation has a kill switch. We didn't give the galaxy our technology to be nice. We gave it to you so we could maintain a civilized baseline. When you attacked Apex 7, you proved you were no longer interested in being civilized. So we revoked your access. The holographic display on Kaelen's tablet shifted, showing a live update of the Zenith homeworld. The first breach wasn't just physical, it was ideological. The Autocracy's legendary orbital defense network was literally turning its weapons inward, targeting the very shipyards that built them. "This is a violation of interstellar law," Vash-Korr shouted, his eyes wide with the realization of total helplessness. "Actually, it's the enforcement of it," Kaelen said, checking a new notification. "The salvage drones have finished cutting through the primary reactor shielding. The flagship's materials have officially been categorized as recovered assets. In approximately 10 minutes, this ship will no longer exist as a military vessel. It will be a collection of sorted minerals heading for a human smelting plant." Vash-Korr looked out at his fleet. The once mighty dreadnoughts were being methodically stripped, their outer hulls peeled away like fruit skins. It was a cold, silent, and absolute erasure. "You are monsters," Vash-Korr whispered. "No," Kaelen replied, tapping his screen to initiate the next phase. "We're just very thorough with our paperwork. Now let's talk about the rebranding of your empire." The air in the docking bay was thinning rapidly, turning the atmosphere into a cold, biting mist. Every breath felt like a serrated blade in Overlord Vash-Korr's lungs, his body burning from the lack of oxygen that was now being rationed by the ship's submissive life support system. He hung suspended in the zero-gravity void, locked inside his own unyielding shell armor, forced to watch as the human salvage fleet methodically erased his legacy. But Vash-Korr was a creature of war, and he still held one final desperate card: the Shadow Watch. They were not typical soldiers. They were fanatics whose bodies had been modified through ancient chemical-biological methods that bypassed all digital networks and electronic sensors. They burst into the docking bay through manual emergency hatches, moving with a predatory grace that ignored the lack of gravity. They didn't carry plasma rifles or energy pikes. They held heavy, curved blades forged from solid, monomolecular metal, weapons that could not be hacked, shut down, or remotely disabled. "Kill him!" Vash-Korr wheezed through the failing internal comms of his helmet. "He is only a man. Tear the bureaucrat apart." 6 assassins of the Shadow Watch lunged simultaneously toward Kaelen Voss. They moved like streaks of ink against the gray metal of the bay, calculating their trajectories to ensure the human had no path for retreat. Kaelen didn't even lift his eyes from the holographic display of his tablet. He simply performed a precise 3-finger swipe across the screen, activating a protocol known in the Verity Systems handbook as molecular audit. A millisecond before the first blade could sever Kaelen's throat, the steel didn't just stop, it disintegrated. It didn't shatter or break. The solid metal simply transitioned into a fine gray dust that drifted harmlessly away in the zero-G environment. One by one, the assassins slammed into an invisible kinetic barrier, their weapons vanishing in their hands, leaving them clutching nothing but empty, useless hilts. Kaelen finally looked up, adjusted his glasses, and sighed with the weary patience of a teacher dealing with a particularly slow student. "Did you truly believe that analog weapons would save you?" Kaelen's voice was soft, but in the tomb-like silence of the dying ship, it resonated like a death knell. "You forget the fundamental truth about humanity. We don't just build tools. We master the laws of the materials they are made from." The specific alloy used in those blades was processed using Verity standard thermal reactors. The molecular structure itself is protected under patent number 405. Per the harmful intent clause of your expired license, I have just initiated a remote destabilization of the molecular bonds in every product of that specific metallic signature on this vessel. The Shadow Watch scrambled backward, their legendary courage replaced by the raw, primal fear of the unknown. They were experiencing what hundreds of conquered worlds had felt before the Autocracy. The realization of absolute powerlessness. Humanity didn't win its wars with bigger ships or more soldiers. Kaelen continued, stepping through the cloud of metallic dust toward the frozen Overlord. "We won by making ourselves the foundation of your reality. Every civilization in this sector uses our communication protocols, our water filtration formulas, and our metallurgical standards. We aren't your conquerors, Overlord. We are the system administrators of this galaxy." and you just tried to delete the very file that keeps your world running. Vash-Korr watched as his elite killers drifted aimlessly, looking at their empty hands in shock. His empire wasn't being destroyed by fire, it was being unmade by logic. "What happens now?" the Overlord whispered, his voice cracking as his vision began to blur. Kaelen checked his tablet again, his face bathed in a cold, clinical blue light. "We've finished with the physical property. Now we move to the audit of your biological legacy. Since the Zenith ruling elite used human-derived medical nanites to extend their lifespans for centuries, we are now revoking your biological maintenance license, effective immediately." In that moment, Vash-Korr's 3 eyes widened in a horror that transcended anything he had ever known. He felt the nanites in his bloodstream, the tiny machines that kept him young and strong, suddenly stop. And then, they began to do something else entirely. The horror in Overlord Vash-Korr's eyes was no longer born of anger, but of a biological betrayal he couldn't comprehend. Inside his veins, the medical maintenance nanites, the tiny microscopic machines that had kept him in his physical prime for over 2 centuries, had received a remote end-of-life signal. Instead of repairing his cells, they were now merely documenting their decay, flashing tiny red data points across his internal HUD that read, "Warranty expired. Biological asset depreciating." He felt the weight of 200 years of avoided aging beginning to press down on his bones in a single agonizing minute. "You are erasing us," Vash-Korr gasped, his voice now thin and raspy, the voice of an old man who had forgotten how to age. "We are simply balancing the books, Overlord," Kaelen Voss replied, tapping his tablet to authorize the arrival of the heavy machinery. "Verity Systems doesn't believe in waste. If a client can't pay the liability, the law requires us to recover the equivalent value in raw materials." At that exact moment, the space surrounding the Zenith fleet began to ripple. It wasn't the elegant, shimmering arrival of a war fleet. There were no sleek battleships or bristling weapon platforms. Instead, 3 massive, blocky structures, each the size of a tectonic plate, dropped out of warp. They were painted in a dull, industrial orange and bore the logo of the Terran Reclamation Bureau. These were not ships designed for combat. They were mobile factories, specialized in the efficient deconstruction of celestial matter. The dismantling beams struck the Autocracy's fleet with a hum that vibrated through the vacuum itself. These were not lasers designed to melt or kinetic slugs designed to shatter. They were high-frequency resonance beams that targeted the atomic bonds of specific alloys. On the bridge of the Zenith flagship, the tactical officers watched in paralyzed terror as their control consoles didn't explode. They simply unspooled. The metal became liquid, then gas, then was sucked into massive vacuum funnels deployed by the human salvage ships. Walls vanished, exposing the elite Zenith warriors to the void, only for them to be instantly enveloped in safety containment bubbles. Not to save their lives, but to ensure that the organic matter didn't contaminate the recycled scrap. "They aren't even fighting us!" the tactical officer shrieked, his own armor beginning to flake away into gray dust. "They are sorting us!" Kaelen Voss watched the process with the detached interest of a foreman. Carbon to the left, heavy metals to the right, exotic isotopes into the shielded holds. It's a very streamlined process. We can strip a fleet of this size in under 6 hours. By tomorrow morning, the Zenith Autocracy's pride will be a collection of high-grade ingots, ready for the Earth construction markets. Vash-Korr looked out the viewport. His mighty dreadnoughts were being peeled like fruit. Layer by layer, the obsidian plating was being removed, revealing the skeletal frameworks beneath, which were then systematically sliced into manageable sections by the triangular drones. He saw his soldiers, the most feared warriors in the quadrant, drifting helplessly in glowing blue bubbles, being catalogued as non-critical biological byproduct. The Overlord fell to his knees, his locked armor finally losing power and collapsing under its own weight. He realized that a war would have been a mercy. A war would have acknowledged them as enemies, as equals, as something worth fighting. But this was a janitorial service. This was a cleaning crew tidying up a messy corner of the galaxy. "Please," Vash-Korr whispered, his eyes dimming. "Stop the deconstruction. We will surrender. We will give you anything." Kaelen Voss looked down at the withered warlord, his expression finally showing a flicker of something. Not pity, but a cold, hard clarity. "Surrender is a military term, Overlord. This is a liquidation. And you don't surrender to a liquidator, you just get out of the way of the machines. As Kaelen spoke, the floor beneath them began to vibrate with a new, terrifying intensity. The dismantling beams had reached the flagship's primary core. The very air around them began to glow with the blue light of impending dissolution. The flagship was no longer a ship. It was a skeletal cage of support beams and emergency energy fields, drifting within the shadow of the massive human reclamation vessels. Inside the remaining pressurized pocket of the bridge, Overlord Vash-Korr slumped in his throne, a throne that was currently being scanned for mineral density by a hovering drone. His skin was translucent and wrinkled, his strength spent as the centuries he had cheated finally claimed his muscles. Kaelen Voss stood before him, his charcoal suit still perfectly pressed, untouched by the chaos of the deconstruction around them. He wasn't looking at the destruction, he was reviewing a final set of data on his tablet. "You think this is just about a station?" Vash-Korr rasped, his voice a dry whistle. "You think you can just erase 1,000 years of Zenith history because of a few dead scientists?" "History is just another form of data, Overlord," Kaelen replied, not looking up. "And data, when improperly sourced, is a liability. During our deep audit of your central archives, which we accessed the moment your firewalls defaulted to our recovery protocols, we found something interesting, something your ancestors buried very deep." Kaelen tapped his tablet, and a massive holographic projection filled the bridge. It wasn't a map of star systems or a list of ships. It was a genetic sequence, complex, shimmering, and unmistakably Zenith. But as the sequence rotated, specific segments began to glow in a familiar industrial orange. 300 years ago, the Zenith Autocracy suffered from the Great Blight, a genetic plague that nearly wiped your species out. Kaelen said, his voice echoing in the hollowed-out room. "Your history books say your scientists found a miracle cure, but our records show that a human medical outreach group provided the sequence for a synthetic protein that stabilized your DNA. A protein that was and remains the intellectual property of Verity Systems." Vash-Korr's eyes widened. The miracle of the ancients was a human invention. By using that protein to save your species, your ancestors unknowingly entered into a perpetual licensing agreement. Kaelen continued. "Essentially, the Zenith Autocracy didn't just borrow our tech. You borrowed your very existence. Every Zenith born in the last 3 centuries is, technically speaking, a derivative work of human bioengineering." The revelation was more devastating than the dismantling beams. It wasn't just their ships and their cities that belonged to humanity. It was their blood, their children, their very right to exist as a sovereign species. "We are a proud people," Vash-Korr managed to say, his hand shaking as he reached for a control panel that was no longer there. "You were a proud people," Kaelen corrected. "But pride doesn't pay interest. Because you triggered the hostile action clause by attacking Apex 7, we aren't just repossessing your ships. We are repossessing your sovereignty. Under the terms of the deep audit, the Zenith Autocracy is being reclassified. You are no longer an independent empire. You are now a wholly owned subsidiary of the Terran Development Corporation." Outside, the last of the Autocracy's dreadnoughts vanished into the maw of a human smelter ship. The star system, once the heart of a terrifying military power, was now an industrial worksite. Thousands of Zenith citizens were being relocated to contractual labor colonies to begin the long process of paying off the trillions of credits in debt incurred by their leaders' hubris. Kaelen Voss walked up to the withered Overlord and held out a digital stylus. "The final liquidation papers, Vash-Korr. If you sign, we will restore the life support nanites in your system long enough for you to see the first day of your species' new employment. If you don't, the reclamation drones will begin processing this bridge and everyone on it in exactly 60 seconds. Vash-Korr looked at the stylus, then at the empty void where his empire used to be. He realized then that humanity hadn't just defeated them, they had bought them. Overlord Vash-Korr's hand trembled so violently the digital stylus nearly fell from his withered grip. The bridge of his flagship was gone, replaced by a temporary atmospheric bubble maintained by a human utility drone. Around him, the stars were visible, not as distant points of light to be conquered, but as a vast, empty graveyard where his fleet had been processed into industrial scrap. With a final, ragged breath, he pressed the stylus to the tablet. The screen flashed a calming green. Contract finalized. Assets transferred. In an instant, the crushing weight of his accelerated aging paused. The human-patented nanites in his blood shifted from deconstruction mode back to stasis, holding his decaying body together just long enough for him to witness the end of his world. "It is done," Kaelen Voss said, taking the tablet and tucking it into his briefcase with a crisp, professional click. Effective immediately, the Zenith Autocracy is dissolved. Your star systems, your orbital infrastructure, and your citizens' labor contracts now belong to the Verity Systems Recovery Group. You are officially employee number 001 of the new Zenith Reconstruction Project. Kaelen turned and began walking toward his shuttle, his footsteps echoing on the temporary floor. He didn't look back at the broken warlord. He didn't need to. The logistics of the galaxy were already shifting to accommodate the new reality. Across the quadrant, the Galactic Council watched the live feed in a state of collective, horrified silence. For decades, they had treated humans as helpful, secondary players, a species of builders, insurers, and bureaucrats who were too nice to ever pose a threat. Now they saw the truth. Humanity didn't need to build a bigger gun. They had built the galaxy's operating system, and they held the only administrative password. On the council station, Ambassador Krell's multiple eyes tracked the data packets being sent from the former Zenith space. It wasn't a report of casualties or planetary occupations. It was a series of invoices and labor schedules. The Zenith people weren't being executed, they were being retrained. Their warships weren't being rebuilt. They were being turned into cargo haulers and modular housing units. "They aren't just winners," Krell whispered to the silent chamber. "They're owners. They've turned a war into a corporate restructuring." Back in the void of the Apex 7 sector, Kaelen Voss boarded his shuttle. As the airlock hissed shut, he sat down in a comfortable leather seat and opened a small, steaming thermos of coffee. He took a slow, appreciative sip as his pilot, an AI with a voice as calm as his own, charted the course for Earth. "Adjuster Voss," the AI spoke. "The Council has sent 14 high-priority inquiries regarding their own technology licenses. It seems the Zenith incident has prompted a sudden interest in legal compliance." "Good," Kaelen replied, looking out the viewport as a massive human logistics hub warped into the system to replace the destroyed station. "It's always better when they read the fine print. It saves everyone a lot of paperwork." "What about Vash-Korr, sir?" Kaelen looked at a small notification on his screen. The former Overlord was being transported to a medical facility for mandatory life extension maintenance, so he could serve his 10,000-year labor debt. "Vash-Korr is a liability that has been successfully mitigated," Kaelen said. "He'll spend the next few centuries learning that when humanity offers you a safety net, you should never try to cut the ropes." The shuttle jumped to warp, leaving behind a silent sector. There was no more Zenith Autocracy. There was only a new, more efficient branch of the human economy. The galaxy had learned its most expensive lesson. Humanity was the most patient species in the stars, but their patience was a product they sold at a premium. And if you broke the terms of service, the bill would be more than any empire could ever afford to pay.